Hi, folks. Welcome to Curtis Goes Corner. Are you tired of all the progressives and leftists constantly whining, arguing, and protesting? Are you sick of their bull? Do you wish they would just shut up? Shut up! Do you want unfiltered commentary? Well, you've come to the right place. Curtis Goes Corner. Progressives, this is your trigger warning. Hi, folks. Welcome back to Curtis Goes Corner. From the New York Times, violent crime year in New York. Violent year in New York and across U.S. as pandemic fuels crime spike. A time without precedent saw huge increases in homicides and shootings in the city as other types of crimes plummeted. Already, I haven't got to the story yet. I've got a problem with this. The pandemic is not fueling the crime spree, you morons. The lockdowns, draconian lockdowns, all they did was to delay the inevitable. A pandemic hit the United States and the world. People are going to die. I'm sorry. I lost a couple of family members and a couple of people that come in my store here in upstate New York. It's sad and it sucks. And all four of them were older. It's horrible. It stinks. Draconian lockdowns are only making it worse for everyone. You can't save everybody. You can't. Pandemics kill people. For those nature lovers out there, nature's pretty tough on us sometimes. You know what? Tit for tat. But it's not to do with the pandemic. It's these, New York City of all places, Bill de Blasio. I mean, why use it that the more you're educated and the higher up you are in government, the more stupider you become? Is that like a virus, too, that affects your brain and makes it make decisions that are totally ridiculous and stupid? The first disaster in a year of perpetual crisis has hit the New York Police Department in March when the virus tore through the forest, killing dozens and sickening entire detective squads. Soon the courts ground to a halt. Of course. By June, hundreds of officers were reassigned to cover mass protests against police brutality and racism, where police and protesters sometimes clash violently. Don't get me started. By August, gun violence was surging. Oh, of course. The whole system is breaking down. You're locking everything down. But here's the funny part. They drag you away. And this is where I'm going to criticize law enforcement. I've always been on the side of law enforcement. In the last two elections, I ran for city council here in upstate New York. I've always been endorsed by the local police and their union. I have huge respect for law enforcement in this town. They do a great job. But these big cities, guys and girls and women and men in the police departments in the big city, stop arresting people for trying to survive in their businesses and their jobs. Without you, they can't have the illegal lockdowns. They can't do it. If you're a protester, of course, you're encouraged by the same moron that locked everything down, the mayor of New York City. By August, gun violence was surging, and as December drew to a close, New York's 447 homicides made 220 the sickest, bloodiest year in a decade. Now, I'm older. I'm 64. I recall very much the late 80s and 90s in New York City. Oh, Lordy. They had like 2,000, I think it was 2,000 murders a year. It was incredible. The hobbled criminal justice system strained to contain the rise in violent crime driven by the pandemic's society-wide upheaval. No, the illegal lockdown society-wide upheaval. I can't imagine darker periods, said Police Commissioner Dermot F. Shea said in a year briefing with reporters on Tuesday, citing the confluence of pandemic and the protests. No, they don't even mention the lockdown. See, this is where I have a problem. Yes, the pandemic is horrible. Yes, the pandemic has turned society on its head. Yes, the protests were horrible. Made hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in damage in New York. Yes, they're all bad. But you have to take in consideration the lockdowns, and they don't even mention it yet. The year's crime numbers give shape to 2020's 2 million transit crime and grand larceny, often stealing the laptops or iPhones of strap hangers, plummeted as trains emptied out. Well, of course, there's nobody to steal from. But burglars and car thefts spiked in a hollowed-out city. Well, of course. The criminals that were stealing the laptops and the iPhones will just turn around and steal something else. Well, they can say, oh, we're not going to be criminals anymore. Let's go get a job. Okay. And bodegas, neighborhood staples during the throes of the pandemic, saw an increase in robberies and shootings. Yeah. People are desperate. Even the ones that aren't criminals. They were just borderline. Borderline between criminality and doing the right thing. They're in desperate straits. It pushed them over the edge. By some of the frustrations of shutdowns and economic collapse had burst onto the streets. Economic collapse because of the shutdowns. I'm sorry to keep repeating this, but oh boy, let's continue. Shootings had doubled, and most of them were concentrated in areas hardest hit by the coronavirus and unemployment. Gee, what a coincidence. The increase in violence resembles trends in many big U.S. cities where shootings and homicides have risen, even as the pandemic has driven down other crimes. Well, there's the silver lining. We've never had a year like this in policing, when you've had a combination of a worldwide health epidemic and a challenge to community trust, said Chuck Wexler, executive director of the nonprofit Police Executive Research Forum. This has been a combustive mixture, and police in many ways are not prepared. Commissioner Shea said Tuesday that the department was caught flat-footed this summer when tens of thousands of protesters took to the city streets after the killing of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police officers. The demonstration kicked off a national debate about policing in America and led many departments, including New York's, to slice budgets and to redirect funding to community programs. Oh boy, yeah, okay. Let's we don't want to help the military, so we'll give them all their money, but we're not going to give them any bullets. I mean, these people are just stupid. It's just incredible to me. How are they in charge of such huge, important cities and areas is beyond me. There's things we probably should have done years and years ago, Mr. Shea said. No, the department had spent the months since June retraining many police officers and rethinking its approach to protests. They should have cracked down on the protests right away. But no, we'll call them, I want to keep my huge pension and my huge job so I can retire in my 50s. Police officers, I should say more or less the lieutenants and higher, and sergeants, we're just going to follow what the mayor says, even though it's unconstitutional and it's against the oath I took. I took the same oath when I was a city councilman. Uphold the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The president makes that oath. What they're doing in the shutdowns is unconstitutional. All they did was they delayed the inevitable. Now there's a new strain that's pouring through California. Now they're locked down indefinitely. It's not going to help. I'm sorry. Pandemics kill people. And every time I wake up in the morning and I'm coughing a little bit or I feel a little warm, I worry. But I don't have it, thank God. But what I mean is that it's just the way life is. It's hard. And pandemics come. And who's really to blame for this? The people that had, when the pandemic started, never warned anybody. If we had cut off travel, and a lot of Europe had cut off travel in other countries, this thing wouldn't be as bad. England right now is a mess. Dozens of incidents were recorded of police officers brutalizing demonstrators, many of them peaceful, during protests. Yeah. So what they did was they called the peaceful protesters and the Antifa and the violent BLM types all mixed in together. And the peaceful protesters knew they were there. If they had any, even an ounce of credibility to the cause they were doing in the peaceful protest, you walk away when you see the violent people show up. But they didn't. They gave them cover. That makes them just as guilty. Sorry. The state attorney general kicked off an investigation of the department's aggressive enforcement. Earlier this month, a city watchdog chided police officials for being unprepared and out of touch with the current discourse about police brutality. Oh, really? You think that poor retired police officer, I forget where it was, the older black man, that was laying there bleeding out where people were filming him. Please don't die, OG. Please don't die. You got to be effing kidding me. I promised I wouldn't swear as much on my podcast, but sometimes it's hard. Police officials in New York have pointed to gang disputes as a key driver of the violence over the summer, but several bystanders were caught in the crosshairs. A 43-year-old mother killed by a stray bullet that went through her bedroom window in Queens, a man fatally shot at a handball court in Brooklyn, and a 1-year-old boy dead after a gunman opened fire at a cookout also in Brooklyn. 1-year-old. Jesus. But many cases were stalled because the pandemic had forced the courts to open virtually. Hardly any new trials were conducted, and the progress of many of the cases was significantly slowed. I think we struggled a bit because of COVID. I think we struggled a bit? Jesus, really? And how courts are closed, but when things start to open up, we'll have a lot of work in the hopper ready to go to really close some of the violence that we saw in 2020, said Rodney Harrison, the police department's chief of detectives. Well, I was coming down a little hard on Mr. Harrison. He's talking to a New York Times reporter, so naturally he's gonna stifle it down a little. I mean, I was a little too tough on that comment. Commenting street feuds has been sort of a routine for the police, particularly in the warm months when turf battles and social media fights can lead to spikes in gun violence in certain neighborhoods. That's true. When it gets really hot out, people react differently. But officials and experts said they have something about the summer's violence felt less predictable, and that made anticipating trends more difficult. I think it's about something more, something out there about the anxiety and the fact there's a lot of institutions that are not functioning the way they usually do because you locked them down, because you told everybody, we don't care. And here's the thing. Everybody blames Trump. I'm a Trump supporter. I'm going to admit it. I have no problem with it. But the federal government locked down nothing. They don't have the authority unless it's a federal property or a federal employee. They don't have that authority. It's the Democrat governors and Democrat mayors that did the vast majority of the lockdowns. I'm not going to lie, there were some Republicans too, but the vast majority were Democrats and progressive Democrats. They had insult to injury. Mr. Wexler said of the violence, if this was just New York, I think it would be one thing. But because the crime increase in homicides is widespread, I think it says something bigger about what's going on. Well, if it's happening everywhere because of illegal draconian lockdowns, maybe, let me see. Oh, let's not do it, you idiots. Despite the violent summer, crime numbers in the city remained well below the dark days of the 80s and 90s. Yeah, I remember distinctly. When New York saw more than 2,000 murders a year, homicides and shootings have plummeted in recent years, even some of the city's most notorious dangerous corners. Had 2020 not been such an anomaly, officials said, that trend might have continued. It's not an anomaly because of the virus. It's because of the way we reacted to the virus. This year, as crime increased, the police solved less of it. Police department records, for example, show that officers solved 26.3% of serious crimes in the second quarter of the year. Department figures show that 35.8% of serious crimes were solved over that same period in 2019. Well, that's not much of an improvement, less than 10%. I think COVID played a role earlier in the year where we had a significant amount of people out, said Commissioner Shea, noting that in the early days of the pandemic, when officers became sick, entire teams of detectives filled in for other squads, often in familiar neighborhoods. The clearance rate improved from 26.3 later in the year, he said, but he fell well short of 2019's level. Critics of the police have questioned whether officers, chafed by the summer's unrest and national debate over law enforcement, began responding more slowly to the calls. Yeah. I mean, you know, as much as I'm critical of some of these officers, they have a really crappy job sometimes in the big cities. You're a lowly patrolman in one of the biggest police departments. If not, it might be the biggest police department in the country. You're going to tell your sergeant or your lieutenant, I'm not enforcing this because it's against the Constitution? That's the problem. They want to keep their jobs. They want to keep their pensions. They want to keep their health insurance. It's tough. So as you're being critical, and one little mistake will destroy your life forever, maybe even go to prison. Yeah, They're going to take the calls a little bit slower. But some experts say much of the department's low clearance rate is tied to difficulties caused by the pandemic. No, the lockdown. Officers cannot interact widely with the public, and most people, including criminals, are wearing masks. Yeah, there's, especially in some of the neighborhoods, there's some street, back and forth with the police. I mean, they get to know people over time. It's convenient that everyone is wearing a mask now, said Christopher Herman, a professor of John J. College of Criminal Justice in Manhattan. Obviously, that's the autonomy aspect of being a criminal. But he added the factors of the pandemic and the backlash against the department, budget cuts, shorter staffing, and sick colleagues have probably hurt officers' morale. Yeah. Cops are kind of tiptoeing around. Yeah. They're not as proactive. They're not as aggressive. Yeah, because they don't want to be destroyed. They don't want their lives ruined. They're not doing their job as well as they normally do. And it shows a couple of cops in a little bodega in New York. Yeah, I have a little small convenience store in upstate New York. It's tough. The number of hate crimes reported to the police has also decreased sharply. Yeah, okay. With complaints down from 40% in 2020 after several years of steady increases. Much of the decline can be attributed to the 47% drop in reported anti-Semitic incidents. Oh, really? Do you think that the New York City Police Department, this I'll give them kudos, there was a section, I forget what it was in New York, that was predominantly Jewish, where they actually padlocked a Jewish school playground. Then when they cut the lock off, the city came by and welded it shut. They reopened it, and they wanted the police to come clear it out, and the police said no, and they had to bring the sheriff's department to do it. Good for you guys. It's against the law to make people do that. You can't do that. You can't lock people in. It's against the Constitution of the United States. There is no little asterisk on the bottom of the Constitution that says this only applies when it's convenient for you. As far as hate crimes go, I take offense to that. I'm a 64-year-old white male, born and live in upstate New York. Somebody does a crime against me, God forbid, I'm shot in my store, or someone that's, we'll say, East Indian or African American or anything, any nationality that's non-white, and they're shot, and he screams some kind of racial slur at him while you're shooting at him, he gets a higher crime than shooting me. I find that absurd, absolutely absurd. Because it was racially motivated, you should get more time. It's just not right. It's just simply not right. I'm sorry. But despite the decline, officers contended that with the rise in incidents against Asian Americans that they said were linked to the pandemic. The department began tracking coronavirus-related hate crimes this year. What the hell is a coronavirus-related hate crime? Oh my God, my God. Covering incidents in which a person was targeted because of bias connected to the virus. How can it be bias connected to the virus? What am I missing here? So far, the authorities have tracked 25 virus-related crimes this year, a large number of them involving victims of Asian descent. The department has also got 21 incidents of other incidents, some of which may involve virus-related anti-Asian crimes. Oh, I see. Well, you have to understand, Asian is also Indian. Asian Indian. And then there's Asians, i.e. People that you believe are Chinese because of the virus. It just says Asians. It doesn't say Chinese. So I don't know what the hell this means. In August, the police department created an anti-Asian hate crime task force to address the increase in attacks. How about just regular policing? Just plain old police work. I saw this article in the New York Times. I was just checking something. I use DuckDuckGo now instead of Google because they're evil. Plus, you get better results. This is all because of lockdowns. All of it. I know I keep saying it. I'm sorry. I sound like a broken record. People need to stand up. People need to say no. People need to organize. If you have a small family-owned restaurant or diner in your area or your neighborhood, get 50 people or so to organize together and go in and open the place up. And if the police come, use your bodies as a human shield to keep them out. You have to say no. You have to fight back. You don't have to use sticks and clubs and guns to fight the police because you will lose. And it's wrong, even if you didn't lose. But you have to say no. No more of this. You don't have the authority. And when everybody starts questioning authority, especially the people that have always backed and supported law enforcement, loses faith in law enforcement, there's almost no quicker way for a state or even a country and a republic to start unraveling. It's faith in their law enforcement that they always had faith in their entire lives. And until next time, folks, goodbye and good luck.